Episode number 6. It's been almost 400 years since what we know as the first Thanksgiving, and just over 150 years since Abraham Lincoln made it a national holiday. Through the passing of time and the fomentation of our national identity, there's been a lot of stereotypes and kitschy images associated with Thanksgiving. But this American holiday of food, drinking, football, spending time with your family, for better or worse, actually has some true history and pretty compelling roots. In the early 1600s, a group of British Protestants did not like the vibes they were getting from the Church of England. So they hightailed it over to Holland, where it was more religiously tolerant. They spent 12 years there. They started to feel like, maybe this place is a little too extravagant. And they also start to run out of money. So inspired by the Holy Spirit, they struck a deal with the Virginia Trading Company back in Britain to go overseas and settle in the New World. And about 100 of these people got on the Mayflower and set sail for Virginia. They called themselves the first comers, but in fact, Roanoke and Jamestown colonies had already been set up. And if those two colonies were any example, it was not going to be easy for these people. And in fact, while they were meaning to go to Virginia, they got blown off course and ended up in Cape Cod, finally settling in Plymouth. And the New England winter is far more harsh than a Virginia winter. So the first year is a fucking disaster. Of the 17 male heads of family, 10 die in the first few months. And of the 17 wives, only 3 survive the first 3 months. In order to survive, the settlers start resorting to stealing from the graves and storehouses of a nearby tribe, the Wampanoags. Now, the Wampanoags have lived there for 12,000 years, and they are not very impressed with these people. But there are some fringe benefits to allying with them, so they take pity on them. And their interactions are chiefly led by 2 Native Americans who fortuitously knew how to speak English. There was Squanto, who had actually been to Europe, and somebody had actually tried to sell him into slavery before he was rescued and returned back to his home on the boat of John Smith. And then there was Samoset, who on the first night of discovering the settlers came into their camp, asked them for beer, and spent the night with them. The Wampanoag taught the settlers how to grow corn, how to fertilize the land with fish, how to plant their crops in accordance to the seasons. And the Wampanoags and the settlers actually create a formal alliance, signing a treaty that would last for 50 years. After such a difficult beginning, the settlers start to see their early trial as a test from God. And now, in their eyes, it's time to celebrate. So they decide to have a feast. So they go off in the woods, go hunting, and they're just blasting their muskets off everywhere. And the Wampanoags here, they're just like, what? They come with 90 dudes to the settlers and basically are like, we just signed a treaty. You guys trying to fuck around? And the settlers like, no, man, no, we're just looking to have a feast. We're looking to party. I can imagine Squanto said something to the effect of, party? I like to party. So soon the Wampanoags and the settlers are reeling in all kinds of food. For something between 3 and 7 days, they sing, they dance, they shoot targets, they play games, and of course they feast. There's no turducken, there's no tofurkey, but there is corn, pumpkin, eel, eagle, squash, onions, leeks, and a lot of the food is flavored with what we might consider traditional pumpkin spice latte flavors. Technically speaking, to the settlers, it wasn't really a Thanksgiving, so to speak, because Thanksgiving was a term they used for ritualized fasting, which was like a spiritual practice that they engaged in. In fact, 2 years later, after a few month drought, the settlers would have another feast, which would take on a sense of real more spiritual gratitude. And it really wasn't celebrated at all until Abraham Lincoln declared it a holiday in order to honor the soldiers who were off fighting the Civil War. And now, Thanksgiving is a time to be grateful. It marks the end of the harvest season, the beginning of the truly colder, hardier months, and as Americans celebrate abundance, gratitude, and sharing. Which is why it's a little unsettling heading into this holiday that our biggest news story in our country is whether or not we should take in refugees from a war-torn country, and especially some of the rhetoric being used about them. Now, there's a lot to be said about the violence in Syria and the various players, developments, and the motives for what's going on out there. The fact is, over the last 4.5 years, 250,000 Syrians have lost their lives in the conflict, and 12 million have been displaced from their homes. There's a lot of global power struggle politics being played out there. It's extremely muddled, and there's no end in sight. Taking in refugees isn't going to fix that, but it's the right thing to do. And I feel like politicians are playing us. When division and fear rule the day, we are easier to control. Donald Trump's running around saying things like, we might need to take action which we previously thought was completely unimaginable, like forcibly registering all Muslims in the United States. And then you have Ted Cruz saying stuff like the US military needs to care less about collateral damage and just increase our bombing out there. Which is ridiculous because we're already at a rate where like 7 out of 10 casualties are civilians. But this is exactly how the terrorists will win. The attacking of soft targets is meant to unsettle us and cause us to react without thinking. Yes, 130 people were killed in Paris. But the real goal was the emotional discord that would ripple out and affect our society and our policy. The terrorists call themselves Muslims, but they want the West to oppress and alienate young Muslims, to make them easier to radicalize and recruit to their cause. This is a classic tactic. Young, impressionable youths are full of energy, hormones, and if you get them riled up, they will gladly act out the will of some man far off in the distance. And as state actors, in their more nuanced way, people like Trump and Cruz are manipulating us as well. Separate us, scare us, vote for them, trust that only they are strong enough to take care of us. Not only are they about as wrong-headed in their ideology as can be, but this kind of thinking can and has led to national embarrassments. When the United States rounded up Japanese Americans and put them in internment camps. Or perhaps worse, like an escalation of violence and warfare. Let's not go down that path. Let's not let the terrorists win. A lot of people, rightfully so, have complaints about Thanksgiving. They say we were lied to about it in elementary school. They say it's a precursor to the genocide of people and we shouldn't celebrate it. But I'd like to focus on why that myth is so resonant. Isn't the core of the myth something that we want our culture to strive for? An appreciation of cross-cultural exchange, sharing what we have, and giving to those in need in order to raise up the community as a whole? Listen to some of the stories of Syrian refugees. Some of these people have lost more family members than you can count on two hands. People have lost their homes, their businesses. 12 million people have been displaced by this war. The US has taken in 2,000. The current plan is for the United States to take in 10,000. For comparison, Germany took in 50,000 in 1 week in September and plans on taking in 800,000 before the end of the year. If you're tired of fabricated stories about red cups and politicians telling you to distrust your neighbor, I urge you to check out some aid groups such as UNICEF or HIAS. HIAS was originally created over a century ago to help Jews escape persecution. And now they work internationally to help all kinds of refugees around the world. In essence, they're a Jewish group, which is funded mostly by money from Christian churches, which is giving Muslims a chance to make a life somewhere safe. Now that's an American story if there ever was one. So I hope you all have a happy Thanksgiving. Maybe you can show your family this video and start an argument. But really, I just hope you take care of yourselves and your neighbors and the ones you love, and take some time to reflect and be grateful. And if you feel so inclined to write a letter or donate, like, that is awesome. You know, you have a lot of power within you. Just be wary of anyone trying to convince you to hate somebody you don't know. Thank you a lot for watching. Do good. Be well. I love you. Take care.